Hello everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today I have a little bit of a secret to share, you could say. I'm not actually sure how much of a secret it is. It's not even really something I've hidden that much on my channel, but it's something that I haven't really directly talked about before. And what I'd like to share is that I, Evie Lupine, am a sadist. Who would have guessed? Well, you might have guessed if you have seen any of my videos where I have given suggestions on how to tame brats or please masochists or impact play, basically anything that involves me being able to give a scene suggestion. My Domme friends are here, and I'm up here. I am not afraid to throw my friends under the bus, given their permission to do so, by giving their partners really crazy and frankly probably a little too far ideas about what they could do for scenes. And that's all in good jest and good fun, and that's really what it was for me for a long time. I was just being creative, and I was just helping my friends. And what's sort of interesting about all of this is it's not like I haven't known that I'm a sadist. It's not like it's just a big revelation where I'm like, wow, I'm a sadist. It's been something that's been kind of disconnected from me, an element of my personality, my kink preferences that I haven't fully integrated into my being. That sounds very therapeutic, but hopefully that makes sense. And so basically what I want to do in this video is explore what sadism means to me, how I relate to it, how it impacts me as a submissive, what does this mean for my relationships, am I a dom now, all of that stuff I want to get into in this video. And I think the place to start is probably with how I relate to it and how I came to understand this about myself. So, as a sadist, it's something, again, that I think I've always kind of known about myself. Even when I was very first in the kink community and I was first taking, the BDSM test.org test that everybody takes when they make a FetLife account that basically tells you, are you 72% brat or 100% brat? Whatever that happens to be. And maybe at some point I'll make a video where I actually do take that test if you guys think that would be interesting. But even then, before it had really crossed my mind as anything that I was interested in doing, I was still scoring relatively high on that, if not higher for that than I was for masochism, for example. And it was just never something that really came up otherwise. It definitely was always something that I was interested in, but was never something that I really felt I could apply to my relationships, because on a power exchange side of things, I am a submissive. That has not changed. Spoiler alert, I am still a submissive. I don't think that needs to change in order for me to also identify as a sadist. And because I was making relationship choices where I was prioritizing the power exchange part of the relationship, where I would be a submissive and my partner would be dominant, that 99% of the time usually means that my needs as a sadist or my desires as a sadist aren't going to be fulfilled, because typically in DS relationships, the dom is the sadist, the bottom or the submissive is the masochist, and that's generally how things go. There are some relationships, though relatively rare, where those things are not correlated, and I have just never really found a relationship or found somebody that was a dominant in power exchange at the same time that they were also a masochist. This gets confusing because then you have to bring switches into the conversation, which has been my really big sticking point, because, submissive and sadist at the same time is not the same thing as switching between sadist and submissive. And I know a lot of people who are dominant and sadists, but then can also be masochists when they are bottoming, or the reverse. There are people who are submissives and masochists, but can be doms when no pain is involved. So for me, I was sitting there and I was going, well, I'm a sadist, but I'm not really a switch. It's not something where I feel like I have to go between the two. And in particular, I generally relate to switching as power exchange switching. So going between being submissive and dominant. And while I wouldn't say that I engage in sadism from a submissive perspective all of the time, it's something where I didn't really feel the need to describe myself as being a switch, and I still don't, because for me they're not things that I go between. The submissive side of my personality, because it's the way that I relate to other people, it's the way that I create relationships, like that's always there. And at the same time, the sadist is also always there. But how much I bring them out, how much I choose to involve them in my relationships and the way that I interact with people is always changing. And I'm not saying that like people who identify as switches maybe don't relate to it in that way. Like I think you definitely could, but I am not that person. I'm not a switch who thinks about their identity in that way. And this is the way that I think about my identity. And I don't think that I need to use the term switch in order to describe the fact that I am also a sadist. So I don't, and maybe that will change in the future, but I just want to make sure to get that out of the way, because I don't want anybody to think that like my identity is changing, or that, oh, Evie's a switch now, because that's not a term I personally relate to. So if you can, please don't assign labels to me that I don't use for myself, and if that changes for some reason, I will let you guys know. So basically what this means is that I identify as a submissive, and I also identify as a sadist who tops. And the way that I think about my topping when I engage in this type of play is service topping. I like doing scenes where someone can be in pain, and I know that they are enjoying it because I am doing exactly what they want me to be doing. When I think about the reasons why I enjoy sadism and why I want to engage in that type of play to begin with, you know, I don't like the idea of a scene where somebody is like crying and miserable and upset and hating everything that I'm doing. There are some sadists that are driven in that way. I'm more like causing somebody pain, but then knowing that they like it because either they believe that they deserve it, or because it's bringing them pleasure, or they like just whatever thing that I happen to be doing to them. I like 100% knowing that the person I'm playing with is enjoying the things that are happening to them, and that's the feedback loop that I enjoy, not just like, I'm punishing you and you're suffering and you're crying and that's what I like. That's not really my personality. And I think what's interesting is maybe the way that I play with sadism is different from the way that I think about it, like in my head. If I'm like fantasizing about a scenario, then it's a little bit different. Like I think if I'm like fantasizing about a scenario and I'm thinking about like beating somebody up or causing them a lot of pain, like for me that is a very power driven experience where I'm basically using it as a mechanism to like prove to somebody that I'm like higher rank than them, if that makes sense. But it doesn't really ever come out in my play. And I've been meaning to do a video about this, so maybe I will at some point talk about the differences between maybe the kink fantasies that we have versus the kinks that we actually do in reality as part of our scenes. Because at least for me, there are a lot of types of play that I do, and in fact the types of play that I physically enjoy doing the most are generally not things that I fantasize about. And the things that I fantasize about generally don't translate over into the scenes that I do. And I'm not sure if that's just a me thing or if like other people experience that. Like I don't generally think that people like have deep fantasies about like, I just want to be flogged for 30 minutes while listening to Linkin Park. Like that's generally not the fantasy world that people create for themselves. There's usually a lot more role play involved, or just other kind of like scene elements to it that aren't just focused around like, you know, experiencing a flogging, for example. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an introduction to like how this affects like my identity, my personality, things. So I think at least, you know, explaining this to like my YouTube audience, that would be the thing that people would be like the most concerned about. So I wanted to get that out of the way. Now I realized that while I've been talking about this, I haven't been like defining what sadism means or what submission means or anything else. And if you are lost on that and you're like, girl, what are you even talking about right now? Links to videos down below where I have explained that in detail. But the way that I would describe sadist, if it wasn't clear from things I've already said, is that a sadist is somebody who enjoys somebody else's suffering or enjoys giving another person a painful or negative stimulus. And that's kind of like how I would relate to that term. And it is not by any means connected to any one different type of power exchange relationship or anything else. It's just a category unto its own. Now, I guess where I want to take this conversation is talking about like why it took me so long to like integrate this into my personality and the way that I see myself, as opposed to kind of keeping it in like a distant separate box far away. And the reason for that would probably be the honestly, this is kind of shitty to say, but a lot of it is the reactions and expectations of people around me. Because of the fact that I have expressed a lot of bus throwing of my friends around their dominance and given people a lot of ideas for scenes and kind of like revealed a little bit of that inner ticking of my mind, people like have sort of haughtily and self-righteously gone, oh, Evie, in 5 years you're totally going to be a dom, or like, oh gosh, like 10 years from now you're going to be running your own dungeon, and kind of like predicting my own future for me as though they know better than me, and that like, you know, eventually I'm going to move on from being a submissive and into my true calling as like a dominatrix. And like, I resent that. Being a cis woman in the BDSM community, interacting with male dominance, not all of them are this way, hashtag not all men. I have had some interactions, and like 99% of my interactions with people in the BDSM community in general are really nice, but occasionally you have people who think that they know better than you do about who you are and what you will be and what you're meant to be doing in kink. And sometimes that means a guy goes up to you and is like, hey baby, I know you really have it in you to be a slave. And then other people are like, you're really fucking mean. Are you sure you're a submissive and not secretly a dom who can't admit it yet? And again, for me, this is not a power exchange thing. I do not want to have power over other people. I do not want to be in control of somebody else's life. I do not want to have that responsibility. I do not want to make rules for other people. I mean, I could potentially see it in a very, very narrow, specific context, which I'm not going to get into in this video. But, like, I don't think in my everyday life that is going to be something that I ever really see myself doing. And again, it's not like this was a revelation that I suddenly discovered I was a sadist. I always knew I was a sadist. It wasn't like they were telling me something about myself that I knew. It was just I didn't see it in myself in the way that other people wanted to assign it to me. And that made it really hard to come to terms with and talk about, because it felt like I constantly had to like justify the way that I related to it and like explain that like, no, this doesn't mean that I'm this now. Like, and it just, the idea of even doing that was so exhausting. I just didn't have the mental energy to do that. But now some of the people in my life who were saying things like that are no longer part of the community, or they've moved away or whatever else. And so now I feel a lot more free to explore this aspect of what I want to do in kink, and something that's on my own terms, and not like somebody's not going to go up to me now and be like, told ya. Like, that is the one thing I don't want to have to deal with, because frankly, you know, it's something else to consider with all of this is like my life priority of like how important this is to me. So for me, like being able to express my submission has been and probably always will be like the number one thing that I want to be able to do with my life in kink. Sadism is somewhere around like the 5th or 6th thing. Like, it is something that's part of me, but it's not something that I need to express or that I need to have in my life. Like, I've lived this far without expressing it. I can probably go a little bit longer without having to express it further. And I thought, honestly, you know, because of the fact that I have chosen to prioritize submission in my relationships, that it wasn't going to be something that I was really going to explore, and like I was content with that idea. I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, like, how old am I? I'm still in my 20s. Like, if that opportunity presents itself, I will allow that to happen. And I was actually very fortunate on the camping trip that we did this year. We do like a big yearly like kinky camping trip with our kinky friends, that I did have an opportunity to explore that side of myself. And not only that, I also found somebody that I was able to do with a scene with again. And I don't really want to go into the details of that too much because it is pretty personal. But if you are my Patreon and you are a member of my FetLife, I do have a writing on FetLife that goes into detail about all of that stuff. But it's like, it's YouTube. I don't know who's going to see this. It is kind of personal. So I'm not going to be broadcasting all of that to the whole internet, you know, more than I already do. And that is how I relate to sadism and why it took so long for me to explore it and kind of what I felt was holding me back. And I think something that goes along with this is as well the idea that I didn't really know how deeply it went. Like, having had so much time to explore DS relationships and read books about it and learn from other people who have been in these relationship styles for decades, I feel pretty comfortable with understanding, for individual certain people being able to assess, okay, if we're in a DS relationship, like, how deep does that DS go between the two of us? Like, is this going to be kind of a casual once in a while sort of thing? Is this going to be like a casual daily thing? Is this going to be full on MS? Like, what does that look like? I feel very comfortable with knowing where my boundaries are around that and being able to figure out like how to negotiate that. But with sadism and engaging with play around that, it's a whole like new territory. It's very different, one, negotiating from the other side of the slash, but then also even really knowing, okay, where is the line between, the things that I maybe have fantasies about versus the things that I want to do, and like, just being in all of those different roles, being in a different headspace, and being in a position where, as a submissive, I do have the potential to cause somebody mental harm, emotional harm, but I'm not necessarily at risk of breaking somebody's leg unless I accidentally drop like a bunch of silver platters on them during a high protocol dinner, I guess. I don't know. It's not really an everyday risk that I have to think about, whereas when I'm engaging in things related to sadism, I have to think about that. I have to think, really deeply about the things that I'm doing with people and the risks that those entail, and healthcare and allergies and long-term aftercare needs and emotional fallout and my reputation in the community, and like, oh my God, there's like, and I've been aware of this because, my friend group is like 50-50, people on one side of the slash or the other, people who are masochists or people who are sadists. And so, I know what a big responsibility it is to engage in this type of play, and especially to do it in a public way where not only are you like having to think about what the person you're playing with thinks about what's happening, but also like, how do other people in the community perceive you? Honestly, I'm trying not to ramble too much in this video, but I know there's probably so many things that like people have questions about or things that people are curious about, and I want this to be as complete of an answer as I can make it without just like word vomiting everywhere. And I guess one thing else that I wanted to touch on was kind of going back more to the power exchange side of things and relationships and all of that stuff. So like I mentioned, sadism and submission for me are not like separate things that I have to switch between. They're all integrated parts of my personality where like, I am submissive and I'm also sadistic at the same time. They don't necessarily need to be expressed together in a paired way, but they are within me, all part of, the many descriptors that I have for myself as a human being. And I think a lot of people maybe might worry about like, what does this mean for like my power exchange relationship, and like, is anything changing there? And it's not. Like, again, I have lived with this sadist inside me, for my whole life, and it's not suddenly going to change now that I'm choosing to publicly acknowledge it. Like, if sadism was something that was important to express in my specific existing relationships in a particular fashion, I would have already negotiated for that, and I wouldn't have put myself in relationships where like I felt like a deeper, super important need was unfulfilled. And I know that it can be hard to maybe assume that, because I think a lot of times we do kind of like suffer for our partners, and we do kind of value that sort of self-sacrificing compromise in relationships where like we see it as a good thing when people like give up a super important part of themselves for the sake of love. Like, oh, I've always wanted to be a poet, but I need to be able to financially support you, so instead of pursuing a career in writing, I'm going to become an accountant. Like, we see that and are like, oh, that's a good relationship. I'm glad that this person has decided to not prioritize their own interests for the sake of a relationship. Like, not exactly maybe the best example in the world, but one that I've definitely heard countless times where we like glorify the martyr, basically, I guess you could say. And that's not something I'm particularly interested in doing in my relationships. I don't want anybody to think I'm going, you know, like, oh, I've had this secret thing inside me that I could never express before, and now I finally have to let it out. Like, that's not what's happening. But what I want to talk about as well is just like a general message, maybe for people who are in a similar situation to me that you know, are not only compelled by aspects of submission, but then also want to be able to explore more of their sadist side. I would say, first of all, you know, that you're not alone. You know, I'm here, I'm talking about it. It is definitely an unusual combination. You are likely walking a path in your community that can feel very isolating because most people, at least, you know, don't experience it the same way that I do, and maybe you're feeling it the same way that I do. Like when I have friends, for example, that identify as switches and they are in a power exchange relationship, and then maybe they also top for wax play, I see that and I don't feel like a sisterhood or a brotherhood with that. Like, I don't feel like this person's motivations for these differences in their play is like coming from the same place or has the same motivations to it. Like, it definitely even still feels kind of isolating, and I don't know if that's because of the choice to use the label switch or not, or it's even because the people that I meet that identify as switches, they may use the term masochist for themselves, but they don't use the term sadist. And that's like specifically the term that I identify with is sadist. And so to have somebody who describes themselves as, you know, I'm a submissive, I'm a pet player, I'm a masochist, and I'm a top, or I'm a switch, but then you leave out the term sadist, it's like, well, like, that's a really important part of who I am, and then you're not using that term, and so, like, clearly there's some differences in, like, how we relate to certain things, I guess you could say. So, anyways, you're not alone. It is a not often traveled path, but it is one that exists. And I know you might have a lot of fears or concerns about what this might mean for your relationships or what it might mean for how people perceive you in the community. And what I would say is, if you do have a supportive partner, if you do have somebody that you're in a long-term power exchange with, I don't think there's any harm, so long as that relationship is healthy and trusting, that, you know, in saying to your partner, like, hey, you know, I know this is how we do scenes and this is the way that our relationship is, but I also have these other things that I think about sometimes, or I have these other desires that I think about sometimes. As long as you're not laying down the expectation that, like, and now you're going to fulfill those needs for me too, like, you know, it's not about, you know, assigning, like, you need to do this with me now, or I'm going to take this relationship in a complete different direction now. You know, it was just, like, stating that exists, like, that can be a really big burden off of your shoulders. Don't do the thing that I did, which was allowing pressure and expectations from other people in your community to control the way that you decided to express things publicly. You know, we are all subject to influence and peer pressure, and especially when you do, you know, have people you look up to in the community, you do have, you know, friendships you want to keep, it can feel, I think, in some ways restricting to maybe fully express yourself around some people, even people you're really close to. And I've kind of touched on this in other videos, but to make one example, you know, if you hear people, you know, making fun of you know, somebody who has a particular fetish and thinking, oh my god, that's so weird that somebody's into so-and-so, and like, oh my god, it's so annoying when people on FetLife talk about when they want blah blah blah. If you want or desire those same things, it's gonna be real fucking uncomfortable to have to go, oh, actually, you know, I'm into that too, by the way, guys. Thanks. That made me feel real good about myself and our friendship. And I mean, people don't say those things out of malice or intending to hurt you because they don't know that you have those things, but like, maybe if people spent less time being like, oh, such and such kink is so weird, and these people that talk about this thing they want in FetLife are really bad people, or gross, or shouldn't be using FetLife, blah, blah, blah. Like, not really a place to say. And that's sort of the issue that I've run into. And honestly, also, like, stereotypes with females who top as well is kind of like something I've been worried about, because I don't want to be seen as a dom. Because I'm not, and I don't want people to have that expectation if we're going to do a scene together, because that's going to be real awkward for everybody involved if they think the whole time that they're going to go, ah, yes, mistress, please hurt me again. I'm going to be like, you're who's what's it now? Bitch, what? No, that's not the way that I want people to communicate with me. It's not the expectation that I want. And, you know, I think as well, maybe if you are identifying as a submissive and a sadist, and you're looking for a relationship, if you're currently unpartnered, trying to find somebody who will like honestly either want to do both or that won't make you exclude one for the other can be really hard. And I don't really have any perfect solutions for that yet, but I'm here to support you, and I'm here to just let you know that you're not alone, basically. So thank you guys, everybody, for watching this. I don't really know what else there is to say about it, but I guess if you guys have any comments, questions, things that you would be curious to know about that I didn't cover in this video, let me know down in the comment section below. I would love to hear what you guys have to say. If you like this video, if you want to see more from me, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you really like this, if you want to support my channel, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. That is what keeps all of this going, as well as allows me to offer you guys extra content like extra videos and photo shoots, Discord chat, all that stuff. Link to that will be down in the description box below as well. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.